Hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Welcome to the Thursday edition of Let's Talk Tropics. This is a pre-recorded version, not the live that we usually do at noon. And even though this is being set up to be put on YouTube at noon, some of the model data that I'm using is a couple of hours old, but I am leaving the links in the description below. That way you can go and look at the updated models that usually would finish up right before we do Let's Talk Tropics live at noon. And if you stick with me here to the end of this broadcast, I'm going to go into one of those pages where I get a lot of the computer model data, and I'll kind of demonstrate on how you can find that and how you can look at different models, including previous models, so you can kind of compare model to model run to see how things are going, as things might be getting a little bit more interesting as we go into the early part of November. But all the fog that we had earlier this morning has dissipated. There's still a little haze out there in the late morning hours here, but as we go into the afternoon, I think skies are going to remain mostly sunny. The roadways are going to stay dry, and we'll start to see a few fair weather clouds will probably pop up as we get into the afternoon. Unfortunately, we're not seeing any chances for rain. It's been exactly a month now since we saw the last measurable precipitation here in Lafayette, and it looks like we've got another week to go before we even get a chance for some showers and thunderstorms. So hold on, I know it's very dry, and I even went back and looked at some of the records as I talked about on Acadiana Weather Today, looking back over the past year to see if I could find a 30-day period where we had zero rain recorded at the Lafayette Regional Airport, and even last summer we didn't go a full 30 days without the rainfall there, at least at Lafayette Regional. It might have been drier in other places, but at least for the official recording station, it was a little while before I could find anything that went beyond 30 days. So I think we're at 31 days right now, and we'll probably finish with about 36 or 37 before we even get a chance for some showers and thunderstorms. So getting started here as we look at the national satellite imagery, again, there's a big ridge of high pressure generally covering the eastern half of the country, and you got a little bit of a trough there in the upper part of the Rockies, and you got another little trough that's kind of moving here, and then you got a big low pressure area off the coast of New England. That is actually low pressure and the remnants of what was Hurricane Oscar, but that's pulled into a big cold core low pressure area that's going to bring some rough seas and some windy conditions to New England, as well as the Maritime Provinces there of eastern Canada. Locally, we're looking okay in our waters as things have really calmed down, so if you've got some boating plans this afternoon, I think you're going to be in good shape. Those winds should be light out of the east-southeast, and seas only running about 1 to 2 feet. As far as the skies, we've got some fair weather clouds that are kind of drifting westward at the lower levels of the atmosphere over the Gulf of Mexico, and you see a stream of some high thin cloudiness that's pulling out of Mexico and pushing eastward. So you can see the low level winds are going from east to west, and the upper level winds are generally going from west to east, as we've got more of a zonal flow in the upper levels across much of the lower 48. Central America, very, very quiet, pretty day in Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, over toward El Salvador, Guatemala, Belize, and even southern Mexico. Panamanian coast also looking okay, but on the Pacific side, there are some showers and thunderstorms. And we've got a bit of low pressure that's kind of pulling there into northern parts of Colombia that will continue to drift westward into the Pacific Ocean. There is a tropical wave, though, that's managed its way out of the Atlantic, and it's just now crossing into the southern Windward Islands, and that's going to go ahead and continue kind of on a westward track, but we're not expecting any tropical development there. And then the tail end of a frontal boundary, all that associated with that big low that's out over the northern Atlantic, associated with the remnants of Oscar and that big low pressure area. You can kind of see that there at the top of your screen. But as we look at the rest of the Atlantic satellite imagery, we've got a pretty good sized ridge of high pressure that's right about in here, low pressure up here, and you got another tropical wave in the middle part of the Atlantic that's going to continue to move off toward the west, and yet another one right about there. But at this time, it doesn't look like we're going to see any potential for development for anything that far out this time around. Farther down the road, though, we are going to be watching areas of the Western Caribbean, and we're going to talk more about that here toward the end of this broadcast. But in the meantime, the National Hurricane Center isn't watching any tropical systems out there. That's why I've got the name list there, and the used names are shaded in red there. We've gotten all the way down to Oscar, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Tropical Storm Patty coming up here within the next couple of weeks, and we'll explain how that all goes here in just a minute. So again, we're going to go through the latest models that I have as of recording this. And again, I'll remind you, I'm putting the links to this page at the bottom. Go ahead and click on that. And if you stick with me here, I'm going to show you how to find the different models and the newer model runs. That way, what you're looking at here is what's happened this morning. But if you look at the new ones that will probably be finished about the time this is posted to YouTube, you should be able to see the updated models. And I encourage you to get in there and kind of play around with these websites, because it makes it a little easier to understand how the trends go when you start to compare different computer models and see what one is saying, what the other one is saying. But then you can also go back model run to model run to model run to see if there's consistency from one run to the next. And I'll show you how to do that in just a little bit. But just looking at the next 10 days here on the GFS model, you see there as you get into the latter part of October and right at the beginning of November, you get a low pressure area that starts to develop, and it kind of meanders its way over the western part of the Caribbean. But you can see going out to day 10, which is where this model run ends, that's going into the early part of November, and you see you got a pretty good tropical system that's right there over the western part of Cuba. And the GFS model has been indicating something trying to develop here in the western part of the Caribbean Sea now for a number of days, and we will be able to look at some of those model runs back to back to show you the different solutions, because even though we've got something that appears to want to develop over the Western Caribbean, that's about the only thing that the model agrees on from run to run. The final solution of where this would go going out to day 16, because remember the GFS model actually goes out 16. I'm just showing you the first 10, but we are going to look at the extended part of that GFS coming up in just a little bit, just to see where this tropical system that could potentially develop and move across the Western Caribbean up toward Cuba, where it would go after that. So the Euro model, again, this also goes out 10 days, and this is from earlier this morning. But the Euro model hasn't shown a whole lot until today. Now we're starting to see a little bit more of a low pressure area trying to develop out here, going out to about days 9 or 10. So this is starting to become a little bit more consistent with the GFS. Now again, there's nothing to worry about for the rest of this week, this weekend, and even all of next week. This is really looking out to next weekend and the first week of November. So we're talking about beyond 10 days. So a lot could change between now and then. The Canadian model also showing just a little bit of a broad low pressure area eventually developing down here in the southwestern part of the Caribbean Sea. Kind of inconclusive of what it wants to do beyond that, but very similar to what we're seeing with the Euro and also the GFS. As you get out to about day 10, they're all showing some pressure drops and a lot of moisture increase there over the western part of the Caribbean. So at least with 3 of those models that go out 10 days, we are starting to see at least a little bit of consistency there. Now the Icon model doesn't quite go out as far. It only goes out 7 days, but the trends there getting at the very end of this loop, again showing a little bit of low pressure trying to develop there. But again, this model doesn't go quite as far out as the other 3. So we'll have to monitor the Icon model to see if it gets more into agreement with the other ones as it kind of progresses into that day 7. So we're not going to be able to really see on the Icon model what the other 3 models are showing until about Sunday. So watch those models again over the course of the weekend, and you can see how all of this starts to develop. And that's kind of the cool thing about going through these models, even though 10 days out is generally what we consider la-la land, and then anything beyond that, really, you just kind of discredit most of it. But as you look at model run after model run, day after day after day, you start to see a little bit of consistency. And when you see that, then you can start building your forecast. So I encourage you to look at some of these models and also look at the previous models too. And I'll show you how to do that in just a little bit. Water temperatures, though, are definitely high enough to be able to sustain tropical systems all across the western Atlantic, the entire part of the Caribbean Sea, and generally most of the Gulf of Mexico. We are starting to see some cooler waters there right along the coast of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. And then even on the East Coast, we're starting to see some slightly cooler waters there until you get out where the Gulf Stream is. But all of the temperatures that are out there are definitely high enough that you should be able to see tropical activity continue. And the tropical cyclone heat potential is still quite high there over the western part of the Caribbean. Now remember, the western Caribbean is the most likely place that you would see development during the end of October and through the month of November. So these areas, the waters do tend to stay warm going well into November, but you can see the tropical cyclone heat potential is starting to kind of fall back here across much of the Gulf of Mexico. So we're in better shape. So when you talk about storms that could do rapid intensification, you still have those areas where it could tap into it. Maybe that little eddy there with the loop current over the southeastern Gulf could give a boost to a tropical system if it were to come in that particular direction. But the rest of the Gulf of Mexico and the western part of the Atlantic are now starting to see that tropical cyclone heat potential really drop off. And if you're new to Let's Talk Tropics, that tropical cyclone heat potential doesn't just measure the warm waters at the surface, but how deep those warm waters go. So if a tropical system moves over that, it would generally start to churn up some of that water that's from below the surface. And if that water below the surface is still well above 80 degrees, it can help to sustain a tropical system. Now, shear is not a developing system's friend. And right now, most of the Caribbean is experiencing low wind shear, but that's for today. And even though we've got low wind shear there and you got a bit of a tropical wave coming in, we're not really seeing any signs of development of any tropical waves. There's one here and there's another one that's out here. And both of those are going to work their way across the Caribbean Sea and into Central America over the next several days, as you got a big ridge of high pressure that's going to be here over the southeastern part of the country and into the western part of the Atlantic Ocean. So as long as those tropical waves don't get any stronger, they should go ahead and continue to move on toward the west. But if you go into the early part of November, and this is, I know the map looks a little bit different, so this is taking more of a 5-day average of the wind shear, and you can see wind shear by this point in time on average is going to be relatively low over much of the Gulf of Mexico, the northwestern part of the Caribbean Sea, as well as the western part of the Atlantic Ocean there along the Florida coast. So if you get into the early part of November and you get something to develop into this area, if it goes this way, if it goes this way, if it goes this way, it would have a pretty decent chance for development, because it looks like the wind shear values could stay quite low there over about a 5-day period going into the early part of November. And part of the reason we look at these extended models, remember we give you the tropical weather outlook for the next 7 days, and based on the models that I'm looking at, I really don't see anything that would happen in the next 7 days. But going out into week 2, which would be starting October 30th, going through November the 5th, you can see the global tropics hazard outlook has that western part of the Caribbean Sea kind of hatched in a greater than 40% chance for development, which is actually a little bit higher than what it was last week when we had both Nadine and Oscar develop. So the global tropics hazard outlook might be biting onto something with the models and the possibility of some lower wind shear. But it also keeps it a little bit on the hot side here going into the second week of November. But as I've said, that is the most likely place that you're going to be seeing any tropical development when we get this late in the hurricane season. So let's go out a little bit farther, and we have to depend on the GFS right now because it's the only one that goes out beyond 10 days. So the model solutions have indicated a tropical system developing in the western part of the Caribbean, and several of those have lifted it northward up toward Florida, maybe the East Coast. I've seen a panhandle strike, but I've also seen quite a few of these models kind of pushing things a little bit in that direction, and even some that just keep it weak and move it off toward the west. But I have seen a number of models that have kind of gone in this direction over the past several days, and the GFS has basically had a tropical system developing beyond 10 days now, probably for about the last week or so. Pretty much most of this week we've been looking at least something trying to develop there, but we're going to have to wait until after the weekend to see what the Euro and the Icon and the Canadian models do, because they only go out 10 days, and that's beyond their range right now. So again, these models that I'm looking at, because this is a pre-taped version of Let's Talk Tropics, the new models are coming down now as this is being broadcast. As it posts at noon, the 12Z models are starting to come down, and they're usually finished right about the time that I start. So one of the things I wanted to show you is Tropical Tidbits, and this is the website that I use to grab all of the models. And right here, we're just looking at the GFS, and this is kind of the scroll bar where you can go up and back and forth for the model data. But what's really cool about this, so let's just stop this. So this particular model has got more of a southwestern Florida strike. So what's really cool about this is if you want to compare this time, which is 0Z Monday, that would be actually Sunday night, November the 4th, you can click the button down here at the bottom that it says previous run. And if you click that, that is the run prior. So you can see there's a bit of a difference. Both models do have a tropical system, just obviously in different places. That's the model prior to that, where it has something closer to Cuba and Jamaica. Here's another one prior to that. So you can see as you continue to click that button of the previous runs, you have a tropical system, but it's all in a different place because the models are still trying to figure out where this is going to develop. Then you can go back up here and you can move this model and it'll take you right back to the most recent model. And what you're also going to look at is over on the right-hand side, right under where it says climate here, you can see runtime. So as this broadcast is going, this is 6Z. So this is the earlier morning hours, but if you click on that, there will be a drop-down menu that comes in, and you should be able to click 12Z. And in fact, if you're watching this afternoon and you get onto this website, that 12Z is probably going to be there. If you want to switch models, you can choose the European model, you can choose the CMC, which is the Canadian model, and then you've got the Icon down here to the bottom. And then off on the left-hand side, you can change to precip and moisture. You can look at wind shear, which is another one you can look at. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with this particular model. But you can do this with all of the different models, whether it be the GFS, whether it be the Euro, whether it be the Canadian, the Icon, or anything else is out there. So I do encourage you to kind of play around with these, and then you can see how model run to model run, the consistency is there. And then you'll also notice that when you start to see the crazy solutions that get shared on social media, you can actually go in here and find where that particular model run was. It might have been 3 days ago. So that way it kind of clears up some of the misinformation if you understand how to work this computer, this particular web page. But this is where I get all of the computer models and all the different items that you can look at, whether it's in the upper atmosphere or the lower part of the atmosphere, or even the thermodynamics if you're looking at just North America. And again, if you want to change something that goes out farther in the Atlantic, you can click down here where it says regions, and then you can pick the Western Atlantic, or you can pick the United States either. So you can go ahead and do that whenever you want, but I do encourage you to look at these models, especially today, since this is a pre-taped version. You can look at the newer model data and get the latest information that I don't have on a pre-taped one this time. So just for today, though, we are going to be pre-taped. Tomorrow it will be live once again. So hopefully you understand how to work that. If you have any questions, you can put that in the comments down below, and I can get back with you a little bit later this afternoon if you don't quite understand what we're talking about on Tropical Tidbits and how this website works and how you can put your own forecast together. And that's one of the best things I love about Acadiana Weather Today and Let's Talk Tropics. Every one of the graphics that I'm using is free for everybody to use, so you can follow along and you can build your own forecast, and you might even see some things that I haven't seen, and ask the questions, and I can go back and look at that too, and we can have a discussion on what is coming and what isn't coming, what is real, what is not, and whatever you need. So you can always hit me with a question in the comments below. So I hope you understand all of that. By the way, I am Meteorologist Dave Baker. I hope you enjoy these broadcasts. I sure do. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also turn on those notifications. And don't forget, starting on November the 4th, you'll be able to hear the local forecasts on Big 102.1, Planet Radio 106.7, and Freedom 95.1. Great group of radio stations that is all local right here in Acadiana. And of course, in between any of the broadcasts, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on radio, you can always follow my social media pages, both on Facebook and X. Again, I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Hope you have a great afternoon. Thanks for bearing with me on a recorded version of Let's Talk Tropics this time, but we will be live again tomorrow at noon on a Friday. Hope to see you then.